I stood at the edge of the driveway, staring at the house I hadn't seen since the funeral. The hydrangeas out front had turned brown. The shutters hung uneven, like the place was tired from pretending everything was fine. It was strange seeing it without Grandpa. The porch light still flickered like it used to when I came home late from school. Only now there was no one behind the door waiting with tea and quiet concern. I shouldn't have come. Mom said not to bother, that the house was already in probate, that there wasn't anything left for me. Her words were clipped, quick, like she had rehearsed them. You know he didn't have much. He probably just forgot to update his will. I mean, you were always more distant. I had heard versions of that all my life, but this time something itched under my skin. Distant. I was the one who called every Sunday. The one who still sent him books in the mail because he never figured out the Kindle I gave him. The one who sat by his hospital bed when they didn't show. Distant. I remember nodding, my mouth too full of disbelief to speak. I didn't argue. I just let the silence do the talking. The house was locked. I didn't have a key anymore, but I stood there anyway, breathing in the familiar decay of autumn and old wood. I remembered the sound of Grandpa's slippers, the creak of that third stair. I wondered if it still creaked. I imagined Mom and Uncle Rich going through his drawers, maybe laughing at the things they didn't understand. The pocket watches, the old brass compass, the shoeboxes labeled in his tiny, neat handwriting, to keep and for her. I wasn't sure who her was. I always thought it was Grandma. But maybe it was me, or maybe it was no one. I sat on the porch swing, gently pushing off the wooden planks with the toe of my boot. The cold crept into my fingers. I didn't move. I just stayed there, listening to the empty house breathe. 3 weeks earlier, after the funeral, I had asked about the will. There wasn't one, Mom had said too quickly. And even if there was, the estate barely covers the medical bills. Your grandfather was generous to a fault. I remember blinking. No will? Not even a letter? Grandpa always planned everything. He was the kind of man who labeled spice jars and folded receipts into envelopes by month. When I was 9, he gave me a binder with printed instructions on how to plant tulips, so they'll come up every year without fuss. That was his word, fuss. He didn't believe in leaving things to chance. So no will, that didn't sit right. I went home that night and did something I hadn't done in years. I opened the old metal file cabinet in my closet, the one with my childhood drawings and Grandpa's letters. Letters he sent even when we lived 2 towns apart. Letters full of jokes and quiet encouragement. His cursive slanting rightward like it was trying to outrun time. In one of them, dated 2 years ago, he mentioned a lawyer. I finally updated my paperwork just in case. Don't want to leave anyone guessing when the time comes. I stared at that sentence for a long time. Then I called every law office in his area. It took 4 tries before someone said, "Yes, Mr. Ellison was a client. I can't disclose details, but I can confirm his documents exist." I froze. So there was a will. I didn't tell my mother, not yet. Instead, I requested a formal copy through the proper channels. I waited, bitterly, quietly, like I had done all my life. It arrived 2 weeks later. A thick envelope, cream-colored and heavy. I sat on my floor with my knees up, fingers trembling like I was opening something sacred or dangerous. The first page hit me like a wave. To my granddaughter Clara, you were always the soft light in the room. You never asked for anything, but you gave more than most. I leave you the house, not for its walls or its roof, but for the memories only you will respect. Everything else can be divided how they see fit. I trust you'll know what to do." I didn't cry, it's not right away. I just sat there, the paper heavy in my lap, and for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt something thaw in me. I wasn't invisible. I hadn't imagined it. I was loved quietly, the way I had loved him back. But they knew. They knew this existed. They hid it. And told me he left me nothing. The law office sat on the corner of an old street with brick buildings and faded signage, the kind of place you'd pass without noticing. Ivy curled up the wrought iron gate, and the windows were so clean they looked like glass poured from still water. I remember brushing my hands down the sides of my coat before walking in. I wasn't sure why I felt nervous, maybe because everything after this moment would no longer be quiet. The receptionist greeted me with the kind of practiced smile that made it clear she'd seen grieving people before. "Clara Ellison?" she asked softly. "Yes. Mr. Barnett is expecting you." I was led to a small office with a tall window overlooking the street. The lawyer, Mr. Barnett, had the kind of kind eyes that knew when not to offer comfort. Just presence, just steadiness. We shook hands, and then he opened the drawer. He laid the will in front of me again, the official copy this time. Not the photocopied version I had received by mail. He didn't waste time. "Your grandfather was clear in his wishes. The house and everything in it belongs to you. That includes the furniture, the documents, the belongings, unless you choose otherwise. The rest of his assets, retirement accounts, bonds, savings, were minimal and will be distributed evenly among your mother and uncle." I nodded slowly. I couldn't take my eyes off the will. "That's it?" "There is one more thing," he said gently. He reached for a small envelope, aged cream, the kind that looked like it belonged in a drawer of pressed flowers or tucked inside a diary. My name was written across the front in Grandpa's careful script, "Clara, for when you're ready." Mr. Barnett handed it to me like it was breakable. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I stared at the window behind him. It overlooked a street that looked just like the one Grandpa and I used to walk down after Sunday service. He always carried an umbrella, even if it didn't rain. Said it was just in case the sky changed its mind. I thought about that now. Maybe Grandpa had sensed the sky would change. Maybe that's why he left this. Back home, I didn't tell anyone about the meeting. I didn't respond to my mother's text, "Don't forget, Rich wants to sort the garage this weekend. He said there's some of Dad's tools you might want, but we can't hold them long." Hold them, as if I were some distant cousin picking through memories on borrowed time. I almost replied. Instead, I left the text unread. That night, I finally opened the envelope. There wasn't much inside, just a folded sheet of paper and a photograph, one I hadn't seen before. It was of me and Grandpa. I was maybe 10, sitting on the floor with a book in my lap. He was beside me, pointing at something on the page. My face was lit up, eyes wide, mouth half open. I looked like I believed in everything. On the back, in faded ink, he had written, "She listens to silence." I didn't know what that meant then, but I think I do now. The letter inside was short. "Clara, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and I'm sorry. I always knew your mother and uncle would circle fast. They were always hungry for the surface of things, the numbers, the names on paper. But you saw what mattered. You saw the quiet things, the way a room holds its breath, The way people say sorry without saying a word. That's why I left the house to you, because it was never just a house, it was the only place I ever truly felt like myself. And you deserve to have that kind of space. Don't let them tell you what you deserve. You already know. Love always, Grandpa. I sat with the letter in my lap for what felt like hours. The silence in the room wasn't empty. It was full of the quiet revenge of truth. Of being remembered when they tried to erase me. Of being named even when they lied. I didn't call anyone that week. Instead, I returned to the house with the will in my coat pocket. I knocked first, even though I didn't have to. Out of habit, or maybe ritual. When no one answered, I used the key the lawyer had handed me. The lock clicked open like it had been waiting for my hand all along. The inside was just as I remembered, but colder, lonelier. The air smelled like dust and time. I walked through the hallway slowly. Everything was untouched, as if they hadn't dared to move anything yet. As if some small part of them feared what I might already know. I paused in the study. His chair was still angled toward the window, where the light poured in during the afternoons. I sat there, let the sun reach across my lap like it used to, and I waited, not for them, but for myself. It took me a few weeks to start touching things. At first, I just sat. I moved from room to room like I was visiting a version of myself I hadn't seen in years. There was no rush, no real need to scrub away the silence. I slept on the old couch at first, with a blanket that still smelled faintly of his pipe smoke and cedar. I made coffee the way he did, too strong with a splash of milk, no sugar. I didn't clean out the fridge or open any boxes. It felt like breathing underwater, like if I moved too quickly, I'd disturb something sacred. It was only after the third weekend that I went into the attic. The attic had always scared me when I was little. The wooden stairs folded down with a loud snap, and the bulb up there never worked quite right. But Grandpa kept it tidy, organized in his signature way. Each box labeled in his slanted script, nothing in excess. I pushed open the trapdoor and climbed up. The dust hung in the air like it was waiting for a witness. There were boxes marked 1978 taxes, garden notes, letters from France, and then one simply labeled, Clara, keep. My breath caught. It was an old wooden box, sanded smooth with a brass latch. Inside were small pieces of my life I'd long forgotten. The pinecone owl I made in second grade, my first typed story, a dried dandelion pressed into a dictionary page, birthday cards I never knew he kept, all dated, all preserved like relics. There was a note taped to the underside of the lid. Even when they look past you, I see you. I always did. I held that box in my lap like it might vanish. A week later, the knock came. I didn't have to ask who it was. I recognized the rhythm of my mother's impatience, even through the door. I opened it slowly. She stood there with a tight-lipped smile and sunglasses too big for the overcast sky. Behind her, Uncle Rich shifted uncomfortably, holding a plastic bin labeled Dad's Tools. I didn't invite them in. She looked past me, scanning the hallway. "You've really been staying here?" I nodded. She laughed under her breath, like it was all a bit dramatic. "Well, we thought we'd come by and, figure out what happens next." I tilted my head. "Next?" "With the house, the belongings. You said you were going to help us sort it all." "I never said that," I replied calmly. Her mouth opened, but no words came. Uncle Rich stepped forward. "We assumed. There was no official documentation. You told us that, right? I did, I said, because that's what you told me. I let that hang in the air for a moment. Then I stepped aside, just enough for them to see, the framed will on the hallway wall, mounted neatly between Grandpa's old coat and a photograph of us reading on the porch swing. Their eyes locked on it. Neither of them moved. My mother finally spoke, voice barely a whisper. You had it all this time? I met her gaze, my voice steady. Number you did. They didn't stay long. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse them of anything beyond what they had done. They already knew, and I had no interest in begging for what was already mine. They left in silence, bin still in hand, and I closed the door behind them softly, like one closes a book that no longer needs rereading. That night, I walked through the house barefoot. I touched the walls. I whispered good night to rooms that had once held stories only Grandpa and I remembered. And when I reached the attic stairs, I looked up into the soft shadows and smiled, because I wasn't alone, not anymore. The final time I saw them was months later. A wedding, a cousin's. They sat 2 rows in front of me, laughing too loudly, greeting people like they were auditioning for affection. When they turned around and saw me, their smiles faltered. But I didn't look away. I gave them a nod, polite, distant, not out of hate, just peace, because sometimes revenge isn't loud. It's a name written on a will, a letter left in a drawer, a house that finally feels like home, and the silence you no longer fear,